A shabbily dressed man, with eyes that had seen too much, walked the grimy city streets, a ghost oblivious to the bustling urban chaos. Silver threaded through his unkempt hair like frost on a forgotten gravestone, and the deep furrows etched at the corners of his haunted eyes spoke volumes of a life lived hard and unforgiving. He was a man named Nick, though no one on these streets knew it or cared. The local street dwellers, with their uncanny sixth sense honed by hardship, recognized him as one of their own, yet different. There was an air about him, a quiet intensity in his gaze that warned he wasn't one to run with the pack. They gave him a wide berth. To a casual glance, he might have been 35, but a closer look revealed the weariness of a man carrying an extra decade, perhaps more. It wasn't a life of vice that had aged him. Nick didn't smoke, and alcohol held no allure. Surprisingly, despite his tattered clothes and the fact that he slept wherever he could find shelter, he maintained a certain tidiness, washing his meager garments in public fountains when opportunity arose. Beneath a dense, untamed beard lay a vicious scar, a secret witness to a past he kept buried. A battered old baseball cap pulled low cast his eyes in perpetual shadow, lending him an almost intimidating mien. It seemed nothing in this uncaring world could stir him. Then, the shriek of tires. A boy, no older than 10, shot out on a brand-new bicycle, straight into a red light and the path of a monstrous semi-truck. The child, dwarfed by the roaring beast of metal, was a gnat before a hurricane. But if Nick lacked worldly possessions, he possessed lightning reflexes. In a blur, he lunged, yanking the boy by the collar of his designer tracksuit. "Hey, kid, watch it," he rasped, hauling him back to the curb in the nick of time. The bicycle, however, wasn't so lucky, crumpling under the truck's massive wheels with a sickening crunch. The driver, a burly man with a face like a clenched fist, leaped from his cab, bellowing, "You little idiot! You got a death wish? Where are your damn parents?" The boy, pale and trembling, shrank back, tears welling. Nick, his usually impassive face unreadable, simply stared at the driver. There was something in that gaze, cold, unyielding, that made the trucker's bluster wither. He grumbled, "Kids these days, no supervision," and clambered back into his cab, eager to be away. The truck rumbled off. "You okay?" Nick asked the boy, his voice surprisingly gentle. "What were you thinking, darting out like that? Don't you know traffic rules, champ?" The boy sniffled. I heard of 'em. It's a new bike. I guess I haven't figured out the brakes yet." "Fancy bike to be learning on," Nick observed, a wry twist to his lips. "Glad you're in one piece. The bike, not so much." He gestured to the mangled remains. "Thanks, mister," the boy stammered, regaining a sliver of his composure. He looked up at Nick, a strange mixture of fear and awe in his young eyes. "Please don't tell anyone. My dad, he'll kill me." He paused, then a spark of something else, a sudden idea, lit his face. "But hey, I gotta thank you. You saved my life for real." Nick almost chuckled. "And how, pray tell, can a little guy like you repay me?" he drawled, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. He took in the boy's expensive tracksuit, the pristine sneakers. Rich kid, no doubt, probably offering up his lunch money. "My dad's a millionaire," Bobby declared, his voice surprisingly firm, a touch of pride creeping in. "Seriously, he'll shower you with gold if he finds out you saved me. He owns like all the best restaurants in the city." Nick raised an eyebrow. "A millionaire, huh? Restaurants?" "Yeah. The Vintage Spoon, ever heard of it? The main one's downtown, super fancy. All the big shots hang out there," Bobby boasted, puffing out his chest a little. "Come on, he'll give you a huge reward. Cash, anything you want." The words, "the Vintage Spoon," echoed in Nick's mind. A flicker, cold and sharp, ignited in his eyes. A glint the boy, in his youthful enthusiasm, completely missed. He was too eager to either genuinely repay his rescuer, perhaps with his father's deep pockets, or maybe just to show off his wealthy parentage to this mysterious, ragged man. Or perhaps, Nick mused, a bit of both. The kid was persistent, surprisingly confident for his age, almost businesslike. "A restaurant, you say?" Nick murmured, a thoughtful, almost predatory look crossing his face. Yeah, a restaurant could be useful. Unexpectedly, Nick found himself warming to the boy. There was a certain solidness to him, a miniature adult, yet still disarmingly innocent. All right, kid, Nick finally said, a strange resolve settling in. Lead the way. Oh, and the name's Nick. Cool, I'm Bobby. The boy stuck out a small hand. Nick clasped it briefly, a rough, calloused hand meeting a soft, pampered one. Let's go, Nick. Passers-by cast curious, sometimes disdainful glances at the incongruous pair, the well-dressed, confident child chattering animatedly, and the brooding, poorly clad man with the heavy gaze, walking silently beside him. Neither of them noticed. Each was lost in their own thoughts, heading towards an encounter that could change everything. The grand entrance of the Vintage Spoon loomed, its polished brass and dark wood exuding an air of old money opulence. As Bobby and Nick approached the imposing entrance of the Vintage Spoon, a uniformed doorman, built like a linebacker, stepped forward, his expression instantly souring as he took in Nick's appearance. "Whoa there, buddy," he drawled, his voice dripping with disdain. "This ain't a shelter. Beat it before you scare off the clientele. We run a respectable establishment here." Another security guard, lurking nearby, snorted. "Don't waste your breath, Tony. Just give him the heave-ho." Bobby, however, planted himself firmly in front of Nick. "Hold on," he piped up, his small voice surprisingly authoritative. "This man is with me. He's a guest of my father." The guards exchanged bewildered glances. They knew Bobby, of course. The boss's kid, a bit of a handful sometimes, but usually just curious, asking them endless questions about their jobs. They'd even let him hang out in their little security office now and then. But this? Bringing a vagrant to the doorstep of one of the city's most exclusive eateries? This was a new level of bizarre. I think I should probably go," Nick said quietly, the shadows in his eyes deepening. The familiar sting of rejection, of being judged, was a bitter pill he'd swallowed too many times. "Take care, Bobby, and stay off the busy streets with that new bike when you get one." "No, wait," Bobby insisted, grabbing Nick's rough hand. "You saved my life. Dad has to thank you. Just wait here on this bench, okay? I'll be right back. Promise." With a determined nod, he darted inside, leaving Nick alone with the skeptical glares of the security team. Inside, Bobby found his father, Serge Bishop, in his lavish, wood-paneled office, a cloud of expensive cigar smoke hanging in the air. "Dad!" Bobby burst in. Serge looked up from a stack of papers, a flicker of annoyance crossing his handsome, yet somewhat ruthless features. "Bobby? What is it? Can't you see I'm busy?" "Dad, I need to talk to you. It's about someone important," Bobby said, adopting a solemn, almost adult tone that momentarily surprised his father. Serge listened, his frown deepening as Bobby recounted the tale of the runaway bike and the last-minute rescue. He interpreted his father's stern expression as anger over the destroyed bicycle. "Dad, are you mad about the bike?" Bobby asked, his voice suddenly small. No, of course not, son," Serge replied, his tone a little too smooth, a little too dismissive. "We'll get you a new one, a better one." "No, Dad, that's not it," Bobby exclaimed. "You gotta help the man who saved me. He's cool. He looks like a hero from an action movie." Serge chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "A hero? This homeless man?" "He's not like the others, Dad. You gotta see him," Bobby pleaded, his young face earnest. Serge sighed, a put-upon expression settling on his features. "Son, I'm swamped right now. Really. Look, I'll have my manager give your savior a token of my appreciation. That'll be my thanks." He waved a dismissive hand. "But Dad, money's just paper. It's here today, gone tomorrow. You always say that," Bobby protested, unknowingly echoing one of Serge's cynical pronouncements. "You should give him a real chance, like a fishing rod, not just a fish. You know, that saying?" Serge looked momentarily surprised by his son's use of the proverb. "A fishing rod, eh?" He paused, a calculating glint in his eye. An idea, cheap and convenient, began to form. "All right, son, all right. Tell your hero to wait by the coat check. I'll have someone speak to him. And let security know he's not to be bothered." Bobby's face lit up. "You will? Thanks, Dad. You're the best." He scampered out, overjoyed. Once Bobby was gone, Serge picked up his phone and buzzed his general manager. "Bruce, get up to my office, now, it's urgent." Bruce, a perpetually stressed-looking man in a tailored suit, appeared within minutes, his face a mask of professional deference. "Yes, Mr. Bishop?" "Bruce," Serge began, steepling his fingers. "There's a man downstairs by the coat check. Let's just say he's distinctively attired. My son seems to think I owe him something. Offer him a job, janitor, cleaner, something menial. Get him a uniform, brief him on the basics. Don't get sentimental, but don't rough him up either. He can start tomorrow. Got it?" Bruce nodded, his expression unchanging. "Understood, Mr. Bishop." He knew better than to question his boss's whims. Serge Bishop didn't do things without a reason, even if that reason was sometimes opaque. This clearly wasn't an act of charity. Bruce suspected it was more about placating young Bobby, but it wasn't his place to pry. He was management, yes, but still just an employee. Bruce descended to the lobby. If he was surprised to see the disheveled figure of Nick waiting patiently, he didn't show it. Years in the high-pressure restaurant business had taught him to maintain his composure. "Good afternoon," Bruce said, his voice polite but devoid of warmth. "Mr. Bishop has instructed me to offer you a position as a cleaner here at the Vintage Spoon." Nick, who had been staring blankly ahead, looked up. "Serge Bishop?" he asked, his voice a low rumble, the name tasting sickeningly familiar on his tongue. "Yes, that's the owner's name," Bruce confirmed. The name, spoken aloud, hit Nick like a jolt of electricity. Could it be? The same Serge Bishop he had once known, once trusted. The thought of appearing before an old acquaintance in such a wretched state was mortifying. Yet, an opportunity. A way back in, perhaps. A way to find answers. With a heavy heart, but a flicker of grim purpose in his eyes, Nick accepted. Money was the last thing on his mind, but he knew he couldn't wander the streets forever. He couldn't end his days on some forgotten city trash heap. "Excellent," Bruce said, a hint of relief in his tone that the awkward encounter was progressing smoothly. "I'll arrange for a uniform. Your shift starts at 7:30 a.m. tomorrow. Punctuality is paramount. Mr. Bishop is particular about it." Nick merely nodded. "And," Bruce added, as if an afterthought, "there's a small utility room in the basement. You can use it for now. Just no pilfering food from the kitchen. The boss has eyes everywhere, and he's not known for his leniency. Let's just say he has connections, serious ones. Best not to cross him." Bruce gave Nick a meaningful look, a subtle warning. Nick's lips twitched in a barely perceptible, humorless smile. "Connections, huh? I've dealt with worse than your boss, pal. I've survived schools of hard knocks he can't even dream of." But he kept his thoughts to himself. That evening, Nick returned to the derelict loft space that had been his makeshift shelter for the past few months. He ate his meager dinner, a stale bagel, and a lukewarm coffee he'd bought with coins earned from unloading a truck at the market earlier. The thought of the restaurant's utility room, basic as it was, felt like a step up. Autumn was setting in, and nights in the unheated loft were becoming brutal. Plus, the promise of regular hot meals was a luxury he hadn't experienced in what felt like an eternity. At the mere thought, his stomach rumbled. Serge Bishop. Could it truly be the same man? The city was vast. Surely there were other Serge Bishops. He tried to dismiss the gnawing suspicion. At 6 the next morning, long before any alarm clock was needed, Nick was awake. He washed with bottled water and finished the remnants of last night's feast. The loft was strategically chosen. Across the street, a large digital clock display on a bank building served as his timepiece. The restaurant was a 30-minute walk. By 7, he was on his way, a silent warrior, heading into a new, uncertain battle for his place in the sun. And then, he'd figure out who had stolen that place from him in the first place. He arrived at the Vintage Spoon precisely at 7:30. A kind-faced, matronly cook, probably in her early 50s, but still with a sparkle in her eye, took pity on him. "You must be starving, dear," she said sympathetically, placing a steaming plate of scrambled eggs, green onions, a warm biscuit, and a mug of milky coffee before him. Nick couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten hot food, let alone something so delicious. Or perhaps it just seemed that way after so long. He thanked her, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to show, and devoured the meal. His duties were straightforward: sweep the back alley and loading dock, clean up after the previous night's patrons, and haul trash to the dumpsters. The work was long and hard, but Nick didn't mind. Honest labor, he mused, could make a man out of anyone. Or perhaps rediscover the man within. Initially, the other staff members regarded Nick with a mixture of amusement and disdain. "Wonder if he knows how to flush a toilet," a young busboy snickered to a waitress, who giggled in response. But gradually, the mockery subsided. They saw that the new janitor not only knew basic hygiene, but also handled his cutlery with an unexpected, almost refined grace during his break-room meals. More importantly, they began to sense an undercurrent of strength, a quiet dignity that belied his ragged appearance and menial job. The first time Nick used the staff shower and emerged, clean-shaven, he'd found a discarded razor and some soap. Wearing a cheap but clean t-shirt he'd bought at a thrift store, a few of the female employees took a second look. "You know," remarked Kate, a sharp-tongued waitress, to her colleague Jane, "cleaned up, he's not bad. Kinda rugged." "Definitely rugged," Jane agreed, her eyes appraising. "There's something dangerous about him, though. You feel it?" "Oh, totally," Kate whispered back. "That's what makes him intriguing, right? Those eyes, like he's seen things?" "Yeah, like the inside of a maximum security prison," Jane muttered, though not unkindly. One of the security guards, Andrew, who'd initially been dismissive, caught a glimpse of Nick one afternoon as he was lifting heavy trash bins. Nick's t-shirt was damp with sweat, clinging to an unexpectedly muscular physique. Andrew had been about to make a crack about Nick finally looking presentable enough to get a date, but the sight of those well-defined, corded muscles gave him pause. "Man's built like a brick shithouse," Andrew thought, impressed despite himself. He should be working security, not hauling garbage. He decided to keep his jokes to himself. No point in riling a guy who clearly knew how to handle himself. Meanwhile, Serge Bishop was reclining on a plush, red leather sofa at the Phoenix Lounge, an exclusive gentleman's club, leering at the scantily clad dancers. "Damn, they're fine," he mused, a predatory gleam in his eyes. He winked at a striking woman with caramel skin, draped in a microscopic gold outfit. She shimmied closer, her movements more provocative. Catching the eye of Serge Bishop, owner of the Vintage Spoon restaurant empire, could mean an invitation to one of his establishments, maybe even a generous tip. The other dancers, sensing an opportunity, also gravitated towards Bishop. He lapped up the attention, sipping his expensive brandy. "Come on, ladies," he drawled. "Entertain Uncle Serge." He knew exactly what these women wanted, and though he rarely parted with substantial cash, preferring to reward favorites with a dinner at his restaurant and a night in his company, they still vied for his attention. Being seen with Serge Bishop was a status symbol in their world. It fed his already inflated ego, making him a regular at such dens of vice. Serge Bishop lived his life of debauchery almost by a timetable. Mondays often found him at the casino, a high roller surrounded by sycophants. Tuesdays were frequently reserved for discreet visits to high-class escorts. Fridays, like tonight, were dedicated to the Phoenix Lounge. Other nights were a blur of steamy saunas and private parties, the managers of these establishments knowing him as well as his own staff did. Family and work? They were distant afterthoughts. When his wife, Veronica, a stunning woman by any measure, occasionally reproached him for his neglect, Serge would scoff. "I provide, don't I? Your designer boutiques, your spa days, Bobby's fancy schools and private clubs, all the trappings of the good life. What more do you want, darling?" Veronica would just sigh, a deep, weary sound that spoke of long-held disappointments. As for work, there was a time when Bishop had toiled relentlessly, seeing little profit for his efforts. Now, flush with success, he saw no reason to exert himself. That's what he paid others for. In the month since Nick had started as a janitor, he and Serge Bishop had never crossed paths. Serge had, in fact, completely forgotten about the homeless man his son had dragged in. Women, money, power, those were the pillars of his existence. A lowly janitor was beneath his notice. Nick, meanwhile, had struck up a tentative friendship with some of the security guards, particularly Andrew, and an older, more thoughtful guard named Jerry. He'd sometimes spend his evenings in their small security office, sharing a coffee, a quiet presence in their otherwise monotonous nights. They were the first to see past his rough exterior to the decent man within. "So, the big boss, Serge, he ever actually show up here?" Nick asked Jerry one slow evening, a carefully casual tone in his voice. Jerry chuckled. "What for? The money rolls in, that's all he cares about. Sure, he pokes his nose in now and then, checks the books, but it's rare. New hires might not see him for 6 months. He's too busy living it up, cheating on his wife. And she's a looker, I tell you. Spends his nights in clubs and casinos. He has a son, though," Nick remarked quietly, his gaze distant. "Bobby. What kind of example is he setting?" Jerry shrugged. "Bobby? Honestly, I don't think Serge gives much of a damn about him either. I remember about 3 years back his wife was in the hospital. Serge brought the kid here. While Serge was entertaining a business associate in his office, little Bobby decided to go for a swim in the decorative fountain out front. In October, I had to fish him out myself, shivering and scared." Nick listened, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. He already knew that Serge Bishop had owned the vintage spoon and its expanding chain for years. "The interesting thing," Jerry continued, lowering his voice conspiratorially, "is that Serge didn't start this empire alone. He had a partner way back when they just had one little diner on the outskirts of town." Nick felt a chill crawl up his spine, despite the stuffy air of the security office. He kept his face impassive, but his heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm. "Yeah?" he prompted. "Some say he was an orphan, like Serge. A real brain, that one. They say the whole business, its success, that was all him. He built it up, got things humming." Jerry leaned back in his chair, a reminiscent look in his eyes. "So where is this partner now?" Nick asked, his voice carefully neutral, though it cost him considerable effort. "What happened to him?" Jerry shrugged. "Vanished. This was about 10 years ago, before I started working for Bishop. Word is he got busted for some kind of fraud, embezzlement or something. Did hard time. Or maybe," Jerry added, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "maybe Bishop took care of him. Wouldn't put it past him. Serge plays for keeps." Nick's blood ran cold. The more he learned about his new employer from his unsuspecting colleagues, the more a sickening certainty settled in his gut. No one in the restaurant, not even Jerry with his penchant for gossip, could have guessed that the quiet, diligent janitor in their midst was that very partner, the brain who'd supposedly been jailed for fraud. Only, Nick knew he hadn't committed any fraud. That night, sleep eluded him. He lay on his thin mattress in the cramped utility room, the hum of the restaurant's ventilation system a dull roar in his ears. He tried watching the small, flickering TV someone had discarded, but the images on the screen were a meaningless blur. Memories, sharp and painful, flooded his mind, drowning out the present. Serge Bishop and Nick Mallory. They'd grown up together in the same city group home, 2 orphans against the world. The counselors always said they were like night and day, and it was true. Serge was cunning, street smart, always looking out for number 1. Nick, or Nicky, as he was called then, was the quiet, thoughtful one, with what people later called a brilliant mind. Yet they were inseparable. Some even whispered that Serge was like a remora, clinging to Nick's talent. Nick had a natural gift for numbers, a fascination with computers, even from a young age. Math formulas came easily. Complex geometry and physics problems were like intricate puzzles he delighted in solving. He'd won citywide academic competitions, the pride of the group home. "That boy will go far," his math teacher, Mr. Henderson, used to say. "If he gets the chance," the home's director, Miss Peterson, would add with a sigh, often followed by a pointed look toward Serge. "Sometimes friends can be more dangerous than enemies." Serge Bishop rarely bothered with studying. Why would he, when he had Nick? He'd just copy Nick's work, and that was that. After they aged out of the system, it was Serge who proposed their first venture. "Hey, Nicky," he'd said, a glint of ambition in his eyes. Let's start a business. A real one. A business? Nick had been skeptical. With what money, Serge? We don't have connections, no experience. Money we can earn. Connections, experience, that stuff comes later, Serge had retorted, full of bravado. Think of the big guys. Rockefeller, Gates. They all started from nothing. His enthusiasm was infectious. Nick, always more practical but also a dreamer in his own way, agreed. They busted their humps. Unloading trucks, working construction, any odd job they could find, until they'd scraped together what felt like a small fortune. They found a run-down little building on the city's edge for peanuts. It was perfect for their first diner. With no money for a designer, they scoured flea markets and thrift stores, picking up an old kerosene lamp, a mounted deer head, a heavy cast-iron flat-iron, a cuckoo clock quirky vintage pieces. That's how the old-time theme of their first place was born, a theme Serge would later replicate with expensive designers for the vintage spoon. To their astonishment, their little diner became a local hit. It was more of a greasy spoon cafe by today's standards, but for two ambitious young men, it was the first rung on the ladder to success. And they weren't just on it, they were climbing. Nick handled the books, the marketing, the logistics. In truth, the diner thrived because of him. Serge, as he grandly called himself, was the strategist. My job is tactics, making the right connections, he'd say. Yours is to use that big brain of yours, Nicky. Nick used his brain all right, but he often had misgivings about the connections Serge cultivated. He once saw Serge deep in conversation with a shifty-looking character, whose face screamed small-time hood. Nick voiced his concerns. Serge just laughed. Connections are connections, Nicky. You think legit businessmen in Gucci suits are going to line up to deal with us right off the bat? Relax, it'll be fine. He clapped Nick on the shoulder. Your job is the numbers, he said, his voice suddenly serious. Mine. He let the sentence hang, then laughed again, perhaps to cover the faint threat that had laced his tone. Yes, their hands weren't always clean. Getting a foothold in the tough city business world often meant skirting the edges of the law. Nick knew it, even if he didn't like it. Time passed. The diner flourished. They started dreaming bigger, of expansion. Then, Nick met Veronica. Veronica. That fateful day, the beautiful brunette with startling blue eyes sat alone in their diner, looking utterly despondent. She'd ordered a pistachio ice cream sundae but had barely touched it. It was melting into a sad puddle, but she seemed oblivious. Her cell phone, lying on the adjacent stool, trilled. She glanced at the display, frowned, and silenced the call. Nick had never believed in love at first sight, but as he watched her, a wave of something powerful and unfamiliar washed over him. His plan to approach her was simple. Is this seat taken? He asked, gesturing to the stool. She shook her head, a flicker of indifference in her lovely eyes. Mind if I join you? No, she murmured. After a moment of silence, Nick ventured. So beautiful, yet so sad. Is that even allowed? Apparently, she replied, her voice flat. She clearly wasn't in the mood for company. Nick didn't push. He finished his coffee and left. Half an hour later, he returned with a bouquet of crimson roses and a small, fluffy white teddy bear sporting an elegant bow. Beautiful flowers for a beautiful lady, he said with a tentative smile. If these don't cheer you up, I might just have to jump off the roof. A tiny smile touched her lips. My mood concerns you that much. Can't stand to see a pretty girl down, Nick said, shrugging. Well, not all of them, just the exceptionally pretty ones. So what's troubling such a fair maiden? It's personal, she said, then echoing his earlier gesture, added, hardly worth a rooftop dive on your part. Someone upset you? I'll find him and challenge him to a duel. Not worth dirtying your hands over, she sighed. He gently steered the conversation. I'm Nick, by the way. Veronica. Pleased to meet you, Veronica. So, what do you think of our little place? It's nice. Good food, reasonable prices. What more could a customer want? Indeed, Nick agreed, recalling Serge's constant grumbling about raising prices. Listen, Veronica. We're closing in about 30 minutes. Can I give you a lift? He ended up driving far out of his way, but he didn't care. She talked, a dam bursting, about catching her boyfriend with her best friend. Nick mostly listened. At her doorstep, he asked her to dinner the next night. She couldn't, but agreed to the night after. He was ecstatic. He decorated the diner with flowers and balloons. "Quite the romantic, aren't we?" Serge had remarked, amused. "Who's the girl?" "God willing, you'll dance at my wedding," Nick had replied, beaming. Their romance blossomed. Veronica was not just beautiful, she was intelligent and kind. "Nicky," she said one day, "you need to get a degree. This diner is great, but business can be fickle. An education, maybe in economics, that's always valuable." She was right. He enrolled in night classes. Serge grumbled that Veronica was twisting Nick around her finger. "I'm just listening to the woman I love," Nick retorted. "Besides, don't our names sound almost the same? Nick, Nika, it's destiny." Serge just shook his head. Their wedding was a joyous affair, Serge as best man. Soon, with the diner booming, expansion was inevitable. "I should be the one to head the new, larger restaurant," Serge declared one day. "Why not me?" Nick countered, shocked. "And what's wrong with our partnership?" His calm tone belied the fury rising within him. It was his financial acumen, his systems, that had made their venture respectable, not a hangout for every thug in the city. "Everything's wrong with it," Serge snapped. "I made the connections. You just crunched numbers." "I handled the books, marketing, built our reputation," Nick shot back. "If anyone should lead, it's me." "Reputation?" Serge exploded. "Money is our reputation. That's what rules the world." "So, you brought in the money, and I did nothing?" "Don't twist my words, but to run this, you need someone tough, decisive. You don't have it, Nicky." "We just show it differently," Nick said coolly. "Let's sleep on it," Serge proposed, suddenly conciliatory. "We're both tired. We'll talk tomorrow." The next day, Nick arrived at work to find tax auditors and police officers swarming the place. "Nick Mallory?" a grim-faced detective asked. "Yes? You're in charge of the accounting?" "And other documentation, yes." His phone rang. "Veronica. Nicky, I need to tell you something." Her voice was hushed, mysterious. "Honey, can I call you back? I've got people here." He turned back to the detective. "You were saying?" "Mr. Mallory, you're being accused of embezzling funds and fraudulent dealings with shell companies. In other words, theft." "What? That's absurd. It's a mistake," Nick cried, looking wildly at Serge, who stood nearby. "Of course it's a mistake, Nicky," Serge said smoothly. "Don't worry, they'll sort it out. I'll get you the best lawyer." "Your computer skills would certainly allow you to manipulate accounts," the detective mused. "And setting up a shell company? Child's play for a smart guy like you." "And I'd be stupid enough to get caught like this?" Nick scoffed. "Even smart guys slip up," the detective said. Then came the courtroom, the verdict. "Guilty as charged. Sentenced to 10 years in federal prison." Veronica screamed and collapsed. 10 years. 10 years stolen. Serge Bishop, lounging by his private pool, felt a smug satisfaction. He wasn't one to lose, he only acquired. When he'd started in business, unlike Nick, he'd quickly learned there were no friends, no family, only useful people. Now he was a millionaire, owner of a restaurant empire, a beautiful wife, a smart son, the world at his feet. Each restaurant had a manager, highly educated, experienced. Serge kept them on a tight leash, and profits soared. But recently, the vintage spoon, his flagship, his jewel, had seen a dip. Unacceptable. Competitors? The recession? He'd crush any rival who dared. But first, he'd clean house. He decided to install security cameras everywhere. Reviewing footage one day, he saw a janitor, that bum Bobby brought in. He remembered vaguely. Then the janitor turned, and his profile. Familiar. "Nah, all homeless guys look alike," he dismissed. Serge jetted off to Greece. Business, he told Veronica, though she didn't ask. Theirs was a marriage of convenience, each living separate lives. A few days later, Bobby pestered his mother. "Mom, let's go to Dad's restaurant. We can check up on things like he does." Veronica, charmed by her son's precociousness, agreed. "You're so much like your father, always thinking business." She laughed. "All right, let's go play inspectors." At the restaurant, Nick was cleaning the courtyard, littered with confetti from a wedding party. Heading inside, he saw Bobby in the lobby, chattering with Jerry, the security guard. "Hey, Nick!" Bobby cried, beaming, and stuck out his hand. "Hey yourself, champ," Nick replied, shaking it. "Keeping out of trouble?" "Mostly. We're about to play chess. Want to join?" Jerry offered. "Can't right now, duty calls," Nick said with a faint smile and moved on, unaware of the seismic shock awaiting him. "Nick?" A voice, hesitant, incredulous. He froze. That voice. He turned. Veronica. His Veronica. His heart hammered against his ribs as if trying to escape. He moved towards her, a man mesmerized, and enveloped her in a hug. Veronica stared at the handsome, strangely familiar man in the janitor's simple clothes, her mind reeling. Then recognition struck like lightning. She nearly fainted. It was a miracle she didn't. Before her stood her first husband, Nick, the man she'd been told had died in prison years ago. "Nick, you're alive?" "Why would I be dead?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Nicka, where can we talk?" Events of a decade past flashed before Veronica's eyes. She'd never liked Serge, his lecherous gazes, even when Nick was alive. She'd even warned Nick about him. "Nicky, maybe you should buy out his share," she'd once suggested. But Nick had hesitated, citing the cost and hassle. Then came that awful day, Nick arrested. She remembered lying on her bed, numb, her mother's pragmatic words, "Where there's business, there's crime," barely registering. "Nick wasn't like that," she'd sobbed. Later, Serge had called. "Veronica, I need to see you. I'm meeting with Nick tomorrow. Maybe I can pass on a message." He'd come over, full of false sympathy. "There's nothing more to be done, Nika. The lawyer's helpless. But I won't give up. Friendship is sacred to me." She'd been so grateful. She'd even kissed his cheek. "What do you mean they wouldn't let me see you?" Nick exclaimed now, his voice raw. "Serge told me," Veronica whispered, the horrifying truth dawning on her. "He said you were in a bad state, that you didn't want to see me. He said he'd take care of me." Nick remembered Serge's words in prison. "Veronica's devastated, Nick. She can't face you right now." He'd never received a single letter. He'd thought she'd abandoned him, an ex-con, and all this time, she thought he was dead. "He told me you died in an accident in the prison infirmary," Veronica choked out. There was no need to ask who he was. "When they sentenced you, Nick, I was pregnant." Serge clearly hadn't passed that message on either. Nick just waved a hand, tears streaming down his face, unnoticed by Veronica, lost in her own painful memories. "I asked Serge to tell you, Nick. I told him to say we were having a baby, that I loved you." "Our son," Nick managed, a broken sound. "Bobby. As soon as Serge gets back from Greece, I'm filing for divorce," Veronica declared, her voice trembling with fury and resolve. "I won't stay with that monster another day." The pieces clicked into place. Nick had trusted Serge like a brother, and Serge had orchestrated his ruin, stolen his life, his wife, his son. "My love," Nick said, wiping his eyes. "I still love you. And you," she whispered. "Have you seen Bobby?" "Our son," Nick smiled, "is currently checkmating Jerry in the security office." Veronica managed a watery smile. "Sounds about right." As Nick watched Veronica and Bobby leave later, a profound warmth spread through him. He had been a ghost for 10 years. Now he was coming back to life. In prison, Nick had ample time to think. An old, wise inmate, a kingpin of sorts, had once asked him, "Ever consider your partner set you up?" Nick had been reluctant to believe it. "We grew up together, started from scratch." "Kid, you never know who to trust," the old man had said. "I can put out feelers." That's how Nick learned Serge had married Veronica, asked him to take care of her, Nick had thought with bitter irony. And he did, in his own twisted way. Serge had raised his son Bobby, who wanted for nothing. But Bobby was never truly what Serge wanted. Serge wanted the business, and he wanted Veronica. So Nick had lived as a ghost, biding his time, until fate, in the form of a runaway bicycle, reunited him with his son. Veronica met Serge at the airport, her heart a cold stone of resolve. "Today," she would tell him. "How were things without me?" Serge asked, settling into the passenger seat, oblivious. "Fine," Veronica replied tersely. "Bobby?" "School, sports, computer games," she shrugged. Serge grunted, a dismissive sound that grated on her nerves. Back home, Serge ate and retired to his study. Veronica paced, nerves frayed. How to tell him? It wasn't just a divorce, it was a declaration of war against a dangerous man. He won't hurt me. Nick thought that too. Exhausted, she sank onto the sofa. Then she heard Serge's hurried footsteps. "Honey, where are you off to?" "Main restaurant, urgent business," he threw over his shoulder. The next day, Nick awoke with an uncharacteristic lightness. He was even smiling, a sight that baffled the restaurant staff. "Our janitor's smiling?" Kate, the waitress, noted. "Maybe he's in love," the kindly cook suggested. But by afternoon, Nick's good mood had vanished. He was sweeping the back alley when a sleek black SUV screeched to a halt, inches from him. Serge Bishop stormed out. "You, my office, now." "Me?" Nick asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Are you deaf?" Serge snarled. Veronica, back at the house, felt a prickle of unease. She raced to Serge's home office. The door was ajar, his laptop open. What she saw on the screen security footage of Nick embracing her in the restaurant lobby made her blood run cold. The office safe was open too. Her eyes darted inside. Cash, jewelry, and the space where Serge kept his handgun was empty. "What the hell are you doing hugging my wife?" Serge spat, confronting Nick in the restaurant office, the gun now in his hand. "Want to end up at the bottom of the river with a bullet in your head, you damn hobo? I can arrange that. No one will even look for you." "You sure about that, Serge?" Nick said, his eyes cold as ice, meeting Bishop's. "Nick, Mallory?" Serge stammered, the color draining from his face. In a flash, Nick disarmed him. The gun was now in Nick's hand, turned on its owner. "The one and only," Nick confirmed. "But you died in prison?" "Clearly not. What do you want?" Serge babbled. "Money? I'll give you anything." "Your money means nothing to me," Nick said with contempt, pulling a crude-looking belt from his pants and quickly tying a stunned Serge to his chair. "Now let's talk." He produced a small digital recorder. "Tell me everything, how you set me up, and don't lie." I always envied you," Serge began, his voice a pathetic whine. "I hired hackers to move the money, set up the shell companies." Veronica burst in, just as Nick was saying, "And that accident in the prison hospital? That was your doing too, wasn't it? To silence me for good?" "Nicky, are you okay?" she cried. "Never better, my love," he smiled grimly. "Just listening to my dear friend confess." The police arrived swiftly. The recording, and the sight of a dead man holding him at gunpoint, broke Serge. He confessed to everything. He got 6 years less than Nick, but with his arrogance, it would feel like an eternity. Nick received substantial compensation, though no money could truly repay 10 stolen years. He had plastic surgery, the scar on his face, a memento of a prison fight, faded. "You're so handsome," Veronica sighed, meeting him after his final salon visit. "I'm the luckiest woman alive." "Let's go, Nika," Nick said, taking her hand. "Time to introduce the staff to their new director." In the restaurant's conference room, a murmur of approval went through the staff as Nick and Veronica entered. Gone was the homeless janitor. Before them stood a distinguished, confident man. "Everyone," Veronica announced proudly, "meet your new CEO, Mr. Nick Mallory." Bruce, the manager, looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Just don't work us too hard, boss," Jerry the guard joked, "and drop by the security office sometime." "Deal," Nick grinned. "And one more thing," Veronica added, her eyes sparkling. "In 1 month, Nick and I are getting married. You're all invited." The room erupted in applause. Only Kate, the waitress, felt a small pang. Such a man. And not for me. She caught Jerry's eye. He winked. Maybe? Nick Mallory, a man reborn, proved to be a fair and inspiring leader. He had his life back, his love, his business, his son. And fate, it seemed, had more blessings in store. A month after their wedding, Veronica entered his office, a mysterious smile on her face. "Nicky, I have something to show you." She pulled out a pregnancy test. 2 pink lines. "Nika, is this?" She nodded, beaming. Nick whooped with joy, swinging her around. On a sunny Sunday, Nick, Veronica, and a proud Bobby pushed a stroller through the park. Inside, little Lena gurgled contentedly. They passed the bank with the digital clock, the silent witness to Nick's first steps back into the world. He glanced up at the rooftops, wondering if another lost soul had found refuge there. May you find your way too, he wished silently. Everyone deserves their place in the sun. He looked at his family, his heart overflowing. He had it all. He was truly, profoundly happy.